So this afternoon is Mischief Part 2 by the fraternal twin, Peter.
So my assignment, since I chose to accept it, some thoughts about education, since this is theoretically an education-oriented conference. So here's what I've learned from Ward. So I learn in sentences. Give me a sentence, I can make a living out of it. And I've organized my life from about 3 sentences, and then I make mountains out of sentences, act as if they matter. So Ward said to me, when you take a learner and turn them into a performer, you steal their humanity. Got it? And then it has a codicil that says, if you steal someone's humanity, they end up thinking you owe them something. And so that to me is an organizing framework for thinking about education. So the way I have our educational system as one that is becoming more and more sophisticated in stealing humanity from the next generation. Mm-hmm. I have as its main purpose custodial care and docility, that we organize and design most educational K-12 as a way to produce docile citizens. So Mrs. Shea told me in the 3rd grade, 2nd semester, on my report card that Peter's a very dependable boy. I took that as a message from God. I did. And I decided that's the game, I'm going to win at it. And so you become docile. You hide your feelings, you become a dependable boy, you become responsible. And so most of our education structure has got that in mind. Some place to park my children in the morning, pick them up at night, and during the day I want you to perform all fundamental child-raising activities. You not only teach them content, but you teach them character, you teach them values, you teach them about sex, you teach them about abstinence, you teach them about their health. You teach them about crime, you teach them about drugs. So in my city, you can't lock your lockers because they do surprise drug inspections because we've outsourced to the police in partnership with the school the monitoring of my children's drug activity. We also have a conversation of race to the top, which means we're interested in you if you're the best. And if you're not the best, it's your problem. We call you a dropout. This is why Meg's book about move over is so powerful. And then we scar you for life, and you see adults all over the place saying, I only went to the 12th grade. I'm a college dropout. And then we have an ad in Cincinnati on the billboard that says if you go to college and graduate, you're going to make $1.4 million more in your lifetime, which is a hell of a promise. And that's all about recruiting. It's all about getting the best and the brightest. And so all of this steals our humanity. And it prepares us for a workplace. And so basically the school is a feeder system for either correctional, depending on your skin color and the neighborhood you go, in which it's the same process where consistency and control and predictability are dominant values, where speed, ease, all right, efficiency are gods. And so those schools that do a good job of feeding that world, we think are high-performing schools. And then you look everywhere in the consumer society and you see that people think they can purchase anything. And so everything's purchasable, my safety, my health, better living through chemistry. And so to me, if you step back and say the fabric of this culture is about basically the privatization of a soul. It's about the individualization of all of us. And so we believe in competition. So if it's a race to the top, it means somebody's going to lose, because we know there's not a lot of room at the top. Parenting these days is managing the achievement dimensions of our children. And this is what Ward is up against running a classroom. What you're doing here is creating an alternative to this world. What's the alternative to this individualism? What's the alternative to this notion that I'm not enough? So if you listen to Walter talk about the Old Testament story and Pharaoh's economy, basically the message is no matter what you produce, Jews, it's not enough. We got your cows, we got your land. We own you. And we used to give you straw, but now you got to make your own. And so modern times, same thing. Right now, no matter how much you work, it's not enough. Everybody's working hard. We gave away nights and weekends. I got a plug, a piece of technology stuck into all my orifices. And if you take one of them out, I get nervous. Take away my cell phone, oh my God, where is it? I run all over the place looking for it. And so, to me, this is the patterning that you're here to create an alternative for. Not to fight this, but the alternative. And I would give it a label of education is about producing the experience of a communal restoration. So I see this as a restorative conference, a conference on restoring the experience of our humanity. And to me, that's what you're doing here. That's what this room represents. That's why you have flags going to the ceiling. This is access to God. That's what the steeple is about. That's what that's about, is to create space, the teepee, the temple, the church. All of that is to allow presence and access to God. And so this is a restorative process. Mm-hmm. And so I like the notion that the technology we lack is for communal restoration. This is the future that I'm giving my life to. Is what would it mean in whatever domain you're interested in. There's something called restorative justice. So the police chief in Longmont, Colorado, has had, in the past 20 years, has had 2,500 criminals not go to jail because he provided for them a restorative alternative. Mm. And they've laid this out and nailed it. And it's right up there with AA as far as a great methodology. And the victim says, are you open to a restorative process that could end up in the forgiveness of this offender? They say, yes. And to the offender, are you interested in an alternative to the judicial system where you won't go to court? But if you show up for this, you've got to admit that you did it. So in the retributive system, the first thing a lawyer tells you is don't say anything. Don't admit anything. Were you awake on June 12th? Don't answer it. All right? And for God's sake, the lawyer will tell you, don't talk to the other side. The worst thing you can do for your case in the retributive system is to talk to the other side. Mm-hmm. and to own up to anything. So the restorative system says to the offender, we were going to have a conversation between you, the victim, the families of both, and the community are going to be in the room together. Mm-hmm. And step one is you got to show up and say, I did it. No waffling about that. Mm. Just like the king in the forest. Okay. I'm not interested in you going to jail for 20 years. I want your life. And the next thing you have to do is to say, I'm sorry. And the community and the victim hear that. And you ask the victim, do you believe them? And if they say yes, you go to the next step, which is, I promise not to do it again. Do you believe that? Yes. And then the fourth is restitution. What will you do to compensate to the community and the victim the crime that you've committed? And then you ask the victim and the community, do you agree to that? And if they say yes, then off they go. And so Mike Butler has 2,400 people in Longmont, Colorado that have gone successfully through that. So it tells me that restorative processes are what education is about. And I know the restorative processes always require a communal experience. I can't do it as an individual. I can't do it one-to-one. And so that, to me, is the work of education, is to provide restorative experiences for people who come in the door. And another sentence I learned from Mort is that Maturana's notion that the way you learn math is to have people learn how to live together in the presence of a math instructor. I know that relationships among learners is where learning occurs, in the presence of someone with content. And that to me says, well, we need restorative processes for whatever domain that we want to enter. And what we're up against is a patterning by certain disciplines. One is economics. So in 1776, Adam Smith wrote The Wealth of Nations. And he wrote it as an act of service and generosity. And he said peasants ought to be able to live as well as royalty. And so he lived in Glasgow, where they imported cotton from the south of the U.S., where labor costs were low. Smart, okay? Slave labor. And he said, look, if we allow people to make over and over and over and over and over again what they're good at and sell it all over the place, everybody's standard of living will rise. And he was right. So peasants in Ireland, Scotland, now had lace curtains, where before it was only for the royalty. And so economics brought in the notion that efficiency, repetition, consistency was good for. And the Luddites bombed the machines. They were against this technology. The Amish won't drive cars. And why they weren't against progress, they were against the breakdown in community. They knew that if you start, it was going to centralize control and it was going to break up family. It was going to break up community and tradition. So modernism has been an ongoing assault on what's new. So if any of you are in the world and consult or train, and you all do, what's next? What's new? So I've been saying for years, I have an answer to that question. Nothing. And so that's what you create an alternative for, this modernist notion that efficiency matters. And so it's a corporatization of a culture is another way to think about it. Not evil, but a corporatization of a classroom. So we have to rethink economics. Economics is the allocation of scarce resources. So Olivia Saunders and Mark Anielski and a bunch of other economists are saying, that's not true, that's just something we made up. But why don't we create an economics of abundant resources? Why don't we decide there's enough? So when the Jews left Egypt, Moses, great ambivalence, Jews, great ambivalence. You know, I know, there's nothing, what's that desert you want me to go to? All right, and cross over this body of water, how are we going to get across? You know, none of us have a captain's license. They finally get across, and they say, well, what's the desert like? It's a place with no visible means of support. Damn. That's a hell of a promise. That's right up there where you're going to lose your life if you don't get the question right. Well, I'm the ugliest thing in the world. Kiss me, you fool. All right? And so they went, and then what did they discover in Sinai? They had enough. Manna from heaven. Of course, as soon as they were there, they started to recreate Egypt. They said, you know, we have more food than we need tonight. Let's store it away in case manna doesn't take care of us tomorrow. So that, to me, is part of the work, part of the education of our children. Should tell them that the economic system we live under is predatory. It works. It's reached its limit. It's not evil. It's just leaving. And so you talk about an economics of abundance. And so Edgar Kahn has invented an economy of generosity. So this is what you get interested in. So every time you do an act of generosity in the 30 cities in America and 20 other countries, you get an hour of generosity in your bank account, and he gives you an account. And when you need something, you say, I need somebody to pick up groceries, watch my kids, fix my car. Somebody who is looking to increase their assets of generosity hours says, I'll do that for you. It's going to take me 10 hours, and you get, and it says that everybody's hour is worth the same. All right, whether you walk my dog or fix my rocket, you get 1 hour per labor. So you start looking for these structures, and this becomes a curriculum for education. Content based on abundance. Content based on cooperation. And so the tenets of the market mindset are individualism, competition, scarcity. If something has value only when it's scarce. And so what we're in search of is the alternative to that. And it all comes down to how we manage the room that we're in at the moment. So the other patterning belief system is religion. And so we needed a religious belief system that supported the economic system. And so we have this notion of scarcity in religion, of original sin in religion. We have religious institutions. We have the notion of a judgment from God, an unforgiving and difficult God. We have a whole set of beliefs. And so you start to teach, you say, well, what's education about? It's giving them belief systems that aren't based on these same things about competition and deficiency. That basically the religious message is there's something wrong with you. And so it means I have to change my thinking. And there ought to be a conversation we can have about God as a God of generosity. And Olivia says, when I asked Olivia, why'd you get interested in economics of abundance? She says, when I was young, I was interested in my own spiritual development, and I was interested in economics. And they were in conflict with each other. Because I learned of a generous God and a scarce economy. And so the scarce economy means always that poverty is inevitable. So that's what, and then the third is architecture. That basically modern architecture, the number 10 winning building designs every year, all right, the top 10 year after year are places that nobody wants to inhabit. They're just good-looking, square, boxy, modern, soaring, sightline, glass, and steel buildings. And the same with landscape architecture. The top 10 winners of landscape modern architecture don't allow people to mess up the landscape. So you go in cities and you see spikes where people might have sit. And no loitering. People who loiter in the city are now branded homeless. And we scrub them. In Cincinnati and in New York, when they want to clean up a neighborhood, they do sweeps. And so they take homeless and poor people, sweep them out of sight, like dust. So this is the mindset. So the alternative is to say, what's the architecture of abundance? How would we design a room, a building, a chair, a park, a space to support the idea that what we have is enough right now? And so that's, to me, what you're doing here. That's what this room shape is like. It's not round, but it's close enough. So you say, let's sit in circles. Let's sit on the floor grounded. Let people move around. And Ward has transformed his role statement from teacher to consultant. And he's and so to me that's what these 2 days or 3 days are an example of. And then it can get very concrete, very specific. I know Valerio taught me that if you give a talk on internet, 5 minutes is if you can't say it in 5 minutes, you've lost the world. And so I argued with him for about the first half of the lunch, and the second half of lunch I took his side. I said, sold, you're right. And I say, if it's true for the internet, it must be true for the classroom also. You know, it's just like, the problem with the internet is you can hide it. I know every time we do a Skype, do a webinar, that everybody's doing 4 other things. I asked for questions, and if they're honest, they'd say, about what? It's like I don't want to listen, I just don't want to miss anything. Is this being recorded? Nobody's ever listened to a webinar that's been recorded. All of us here have been videotaped for thousands and thousands of hours. Even our children don't want to watch it. We were saying earlier, most of the conference we go to is all about content. We get called in all the time, give a talk. And then we have time for Q&A, which is the interactive element of patriarchy. And in some place, they won't even let you stand up and ask the damn question. You got to write it in as a screening device against disloyalty. I did that at Bell Labs once. And so they kept handing me a little card with a question. And it was, piped into other locations. And after it was over, I said, any questions you didn't give me? And the guy says, yeah, one. I said, what was that? He says, somebody wrote in, what the hell is this guy doing here? Which was the only interesting question. So that's the invention, the social invention you're participating in, is to devise alternative structures which honor the peer-to-peer conversation is where all transformation occurs. Not some of it, not most of it. The idea of a master teacher piped into 7 locations because it's a defense against reform. So the 2 conversations won't take us anywhere. One is the reform conversation. It's all about money, class size, teacher competence, All right? None of it is about letting community take back the raising of my children. So the alternative is let teachers do what they do in a classroom, but when it comes to health and values and character, when it comes to crime and drugs and all those things, I have to provide that for my children. The neighborhood has to do that. And so that's part of the work, is to get neighborhoods competent again, communities competent again. And not more services, but more citizen engagement. You say, what would that look like? Well, everybody in your block should know the name of your child. So if I was raising children now, I'd introduce them to everybody on the block. This is my daughter. This is my child. This is her name. If you see her doing funny stuff, come talk to me. So the other thing, so reform, let go of the notion of education reform, it won't. Financial reform, it won't. More controls, never reformed anything. Government control, less government is going to help us. The argument for less government is the argument for individualism and individual rights. So I would say the purpose of education is to restore our appreciation for the commons. The job of teachers is to restore care for the common good. So the question you ask every student is, to what extent are you invested in the well-being of everybody in this room? And we get rid of the normal curve, which means if I get an A, somebody got an F. So reform will never occur through more controls, more consistency. Healthcare reform will not occur through better management on the part of the health professionals. They only account for 10% or so of my health. The other 90% is on us. So I think restoration is the business that you're in. So this is a group of 50 people gathered together to experience and invent restorative processes so that learning, surprise, all the things you speak of, what constitutes learning. When was I challenged? When were you last surprised? What are you learning about love? This is what education's only about. That's so beautiful what you say. And so that's the one thing you have to let go of, last thought, is the notion of development. So if you think about it, development carries the message: human development, personal development, employee development, student development, economic development, land development. All says that what we got isn't enough, that you're not enough. Okay, if you're an empty vessel, we're going to do our best to spend a lot of money filling. And so we convince you that you're a work in progress. I consider myself a completed work. I'm done. It's not pretty, but this is it. So one of the things in religion, why we need to talk about God, we need to talk about religion, or not God, it doesn't matter. We have to create space for religion, is because it honors fallibility. In religion, we know we're fallible. If to believe you're infallible is a sin against God. Perfection. And so I like the notion of fallibility. It doesn't mean I haven't got there yet. It means I'm not going to get there. And I have 73 years of evidence that I'm not going to get there. I've been working on this thing for a long time, and I've had a lot of help. Okay? All the people that love me have taken me on as a project. Results are deeply disappointing. So the idea of development is a patriarchal kind of language. It's a colonial language. Yeah. That I'm going to develop. The idea that you know what's best for me, colonial act.
Yeah.
So the restorative education would not talk about the development of the child. It would instead say, how do we understand who these children are? This is my experience with my kids, with Jennifer. So here in her 40s, I'm finally getting a glimpse of who she is. And all the early years you spend worrying about how they're going to turn out. And you manage them and guide them and reward them and punish them. And then you discover all you really needed to do was find out who they were. And then I just decided how they're going to turn out. I said, screw it, I declare victory. So so development, land development. If you talk about land developers, they'll tell you if you can't build on this land, you've rendered the land useless. So what does it mean that land, God's earth, has no use, has no value because we can't build on it? And so other countries, we went to Africa, British went to India, we go to Latin America. We're going to develop you, help you become what they call developing countries. We used to call them third world. And so we got more sophisticated in our colonialism. Now we call them developing countries. And now that several of them are richer, smarter, stronger than we are, we're a little cranky about that. So the word development, you kind of let go of that because it's a deficiency-based conversation. And you say, well, restorative practices are help to find out what people are good at. I want to know the purpose of education in my mind is help people discover what they're good at, what they know how to do. Now there's some content they need, but fine, be present with that content in the process of them discovering with each other what they're good at and how to make contact. It always becomes concrete in the social architecture of the moment. You try to help people, give support for an inversion of our thinking. So restorative education is to help people realize you are cause and we as teachers are effect. And my children created me, I didn't create them. That's ridiculous. Students create teachers, audiences create performance. So it's an inversion. And so part of the shift, one of the thought, and Walter talks about social structures, he talks about royal protocols. So most of our ways of gathering are based on a patriarchal, colonial, royal-based world. Race to the top means we're here to produce kings and queens. And all of you won't make it. And every college freshman class is told, look to the two people near you. They won't be here. And they say it with pride. And so this is the royal protocol. So all the conversation about bottom line, my child is a product. You go into Mount Madonna, what kind of product are we turning out here? When did my child become a product? So the language of product, bottom line, return on my social investment. So all the philanthropists in Cincinnati want to return on their social investment. Well, that's really quite generous. All right, I'm giving you this money, but I want to see something come. I want to see some results. And it implies that people doing social service are not interested in measuring. It takes my wealth to generate the measurement, accountability. It's not that you don't want accountability, it's just that why wouldn't we want to know how we're doing? So they call that the royal protocol. Objectives, the royal protocol is PowerPoint, where power is the point. The royal protocol is to run a class where you know what the outcomes are going to be by the end. So you're my student, I have to tell the Board of Education and the state legislature, here's what they'll be able to do at the end of the year. I'm going to predict for every one of my children, every one of my students, what they're going to leave with. So that's a factory model. So what Larry has given me is an alternative protocol, which is a plebeian protocol, a neighborly protocol. All right, so we need a set of protocols. And I like protocols because it takes the pressure off of leadership. It means the style doesn't matter. I'm not interested in teacher behaviors, teacher pedagogy, teacher style. Not interested. It's overrated, and whatever it is, not going to change. The problem with schools in the urban center is not the teachers are incompetent. The problem with the schools in the urban center is the kids are poor. The reason the colleges promise $1.5 million is they're mostly training pretty rich kids. Those kids are going to make $1.5 million more in their lifetime with or without college. Because socioeconomic status is the only predictor of school performance. Charter schools, regular schools, voucher schools, no difference in performance. So the idea is to develop some plebeian, local. Larry's going to explain to us later what that means. I just love the word. Because it means that basically it's the uncredentialed conversation that produces the transformation. And so you start saying, well, who do we authorize to speak in this classroom? Right now we authorize the teacher to speak. Right now you're authorizing me, an Angelus, to speak. And so the narrative work says we have to engage in a process of reauthorization. So part of what Ward's assignment is, and you in the classroom, is to say, well, whose voices should we be listening to? And I know it's not top management. And I know it's not professors at major universities. All right? And if I want anything new, why would I go to Harvard to find it? People ask me once, well, don't you think boards of directors should innovate a whole new set of controls? And I thought, if you want to be surprised and find something new, why would you ever go to the board of directors? That's a place where surprise is illegal. So you're trying to invert that, all right, and say that we want to authorize. And so finding your voice is all part of that. And so that's the idea, is that we come together restoratively to create a set of protocols, which is a way of speaking to each other. So the language of the royal protocol is a question, what are you going to do? So Pharaoh was only interested in what the Jews could produce. He had no interest in their life experience. And so every time you ask somebody, what are you going to do about it, you're colonizing them. You're saying, I'm only interested in you and your utility. What are you going to do about it? And so you say, well, neighborly protocol is, what did that mean to you? How'd you feel about that? What's it costing you? So that to me is a way of describing the work. So those are some thoughts. Communal, restorative. I think the successor to the modern age will be the age of restoration. Mm-hmm. And we'll see restorative justice. We will restore the earth with buildings like this. We'll restore our relatedness to each other, because patriarchy and the economy isolates us from each other. It's stunning to me how hungry I am to make contact with anybody. And every time you do one of these and you break people into small groups after 11 minutes, okay, you say, what struck you? I don't know, I saw myself in another human being, which means until those 11 minutes, I was pretty lonely, and I am. And so restorative is to restore our connectedness to each other and let go of all the work in progress, not. This is it. It's as good as it gets. Religion brings mystery into the conversation. It's not that I haven't found out yet. It's that certain things are unknowable. And you're it. So the idea that I can know you, profile you, test you, describe you is all part of the royal protocols. And that becomes the work. So let me stop here, okay? I think small groups always comes to mind.